She didn't stop to think. That was the problem. That was always the problem with Naomi Carter. She felt first, thought second, and apologized never. And on the night everything changed. That instinct, the one that had gotten her written up 3 times, talked to twice, and side-eyed by half the administrative floor of Mercy General Hospital in Atlanta. That same instinct was the only thing standing between a man named Raymond Cole and a body bag. But we'll get to Raymond. First, you need to understand what kind of woman Naomi was before that night broke her open and rebuilt her into something she didn't even recognize. Something stronger, something softer, something she'd stopped believing she was allowed to be. Naomi Carter was 34 years old, 5 feet 4 inches of pure intention, and the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. She had been a registered nurse for 9 years, 7 of them in the cardiac ICU at Mercy General, where the patients came in barely holding on and left either grateful or didn't leave at all. She had held dying hands more times than she could count. She had watched monitors flatline while families screamed in hallways. She had learned to breathe through her nose when the smell of fear and antiseptic got too thick, and she had learned to smile, genuinely, warmly smile, even when her feet had been aching for 6 hours and her break had been skipped for the 3rd time that week. She was good at the job. She was more than good. She was exceptional. Her co-workers knew it. Her patients knew it. Even her supervisors, the ones who filed the write-ups, as the ones who watched her with that particular brand of institutional suspicion reserved for black women who were too competent to dismiss and too outspoken to ignore. Even they knew it. But knowing someone is exceptional and celebrating them for it are 2 entirely different things. And in 9 years, nobody had once offered Naomi Carter a celebration. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Decatur, 20 minutes from the hospital. Her walls were painted a deep terracotta that she'd chosen on a whim 3 years ago, and still loved every morning when the light came through the curtains. She had plants, too many according to her best friend Kezia, and a shelf of medical journals she actually read, and a small framed photo on her nightstand of herself and her grandmother, Mama B, taken the summer Naomi turned 12. Mama Bear had been gone for 6 years. But some nights, when Naomi got home from a brutal shift and sat in her kitchen eating cereal for dinner because she was too depleted to cook, she could still hear the old woman's voice. "You didn't come into this world to be comfortable, baby. You came to be useful. There's a difference." Naomi had taken that to heart maybe a little too literally. She gave everything to her patients. Everything. There was nothing performative about it. No Instagram posts, no need for recognition. When she was in that unit, those people were her entire world. Their pain was her priority. Their dignity was non-negotiable. Which was exactly why she kept ending up in the hospital administrator's office. The first write-up had been 2 years ago. She'd confronted a doctor in the hallway, loudly and without apology, and because he'd dismissed an elderly black woman's complaints of chest pain as anxiety without running proper diagnostics. Naomi had been right. The woman had 3 blocked arteries. But being right didn't matter as much as being quiet, apparently. The second write-up, she'd gone above a senior nurse's head to escalate a patient's deteriorating condition because the senior nurse was handling a family crisis in the parking lot and the on-call resident wasn't answering pages. The patient survived. Naomi got a formal reprimand for bypassing the chain of command. The third, the one that had nearly cost her the job, she'd flat out refused to discharge a 60-year-old man she believed was being sent home too soon following a cardiac event. She'd called his cardiologist directly from the patient's room, handed the man the phone and said, "Tell him yourself what you told me." The cardiologist had ordered him kept for observation. The man had gone into ventricular tachycardia 6 hours later. If he'd been home, he'd have died on his kitchen floor. Naomi had kept her job, but she'd been placed on a 6-month performance review, which was hospital code for "we are watching you and looking for a reason." That review was still active on the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday in November, the kind of Atlanta November that couldn't decide if it was fall or winter, where the air had that sharp, metallic edge and the sky stayed the color of old pewter from morning to night. Naomi was 12 hours into a 14-hour shift. Her feet hurt. Her lower back was giving its usual Tuesday protest. She'd eaten half a granola bar at noon and somehow forgotten that humans needed more food than that. The unit had been slammed since 6 a.m. 3 new admissions, 2 post-surgical transfers, a family situation in room 6 that had required hospital security, and a medication error caught by sheer luck during evening rounds that had launched a paperwork avalanche that still hadn't settled. She was refilling a medication cart at the nurses' station at 9:47 p.m. when the ambulance bay called up. Incoming. Male, late 50s, collapsed at a restaurant downtown. Suspected cardiac event. ETA 4 minutes. The attending on duty that night was Dr. Franklin Hess. Naomi had worked with Hess for 3 years and had developed a precise, professional relationship with him, which meant they respected each other's competence and carefully avoided discussing anything beyond the clinical. Hess was not a bad doctor. He was a careful one. He believed in protocol the way some people believed in religion, devoutly, rigidly, and with very little room for interpretation. He also had a habit, in the final hours of a long shift, of becoming conservative in his interventions. Slow to escalate. Watchful in a way that could look like patience and sometimes was just fatigue. The patient came in 4 minutes later, as promised. His name, she'd learned from the paramedic handoff, was Raymond Cole, 58 years old. Brought in unresponsive, had regained consciousness briefly in the ambulance before losing it again. No known medical history on file. He'd had no ID, no phone, nothing in his pockets but a single business card and a worn photograph of a young woman. The paramedics had been working on him hard. He looked, in clinical terms, terrible. But it was something else that stopped Naomi mid-motion as they wheeled him past. She'd been in cardiac ICU long enough that she'd developed what Kezia called the eye, that instinct that lived somewhere between clinical training and deep human attunement, that made the hairs on her arms stand up before the numbers on the monitor confirmed what her body already knew. It wasn't mystical. It was 9 years of pattern recognition fused with something she couldn't fully explain and didn't try to. Raymond Cole triggered it immediately. His color was wrong, not just the pallor of shock or the gray of oxygen deprivation, but something underneath that, something that made the back of her skull prickle. His breathing pattern was irregular in a very specific way, and his fingers, she noticed this as they transferred him to the bed. His fingers had a bluish tinge at the tips that wasn't matching the rest of his presentation in the way she'd expect from a standard cardiac event. She pulled up beside Dr. Hess as the team stabilized Raymond's airway. "His peripheral cyanosis is asymmetrical," she said quietly. "And look at the rhythm. That's not presenting like typical MI." Hess glanced at the monitor, then at her. "Let's get him stable first, Carter. We'll work through the differentials." Standard response. Correct even. Get him stable. She didn't argue. But over the next 22 minutes, as Raymond Cole was stabilized enough to breathe on his own and his initial blood work came back, and Naomi kept watching. She kept noting. His troponin levels were elevated, but not dramatically, inconsistent with the severity of his presentation. His blood pressure was behaving strangely, swinging in a pattern that didn't sit right with her. And the ECG, when she really studied it, showed something she'd seen before, once in a case study she'd read 2 years ago, late at night, the kind of reading she did that nobody asked her to do. She went to Hess. I think we should consider aortic dissection in the differential, the BP asymmetry, the pain radiation the paramedics noted, the cyanosis pattern. Carter. Hess's voice was quiet but firm. He's had a cardiac event. We're managing it. I appreciate your input. The way he said I appreciate your input was the precise opposite of appreciating her input. She recognized the tone. She'd heard it before, from him, from others. It was the tone that said, "You are a nurse, I am a doctor. Know your place inside that hierarchy and stop making me feel like you're smarter than me in front of these residents." She stepped back. She catalogued what she'd noted. She went to the nursing station and pulled up everything she could find on type A aortic dissection. Its presentation, its mimicry of cardiac events, its mortality rate without rapid surgical intervention. 72 hours. That was the window. And that window wasn't actually 72 hours. It was more like the first few hours being the most critical, every minute after a missed diagnosis compounding the damage. She went back to Hess. "I need you to order a CT angiogram." This time something shifted in Hess's expression. "Excuse me?" "A CT angiogram. To rule out dissection. I know what you're thinking. I know he's presenting primarily cardiac. But the asymmetry is bothering me. The BP swings are bothering me. And I would rather we rule it out and I'm wrong than not rule it out and—" "Carter." His voice dropped. "You are on a performance review. Do you understand that? You need to be very careful right now about where this line of behavior is going." The threat was unmistakable. Professional, plausibly deniable, but unmistakable. And Naomi Carter, who had been careful for 9 years, who had been so careful for the past 6 months that she'd bitten the inside of her cheek until it bled rather than escalate things, who was tired and hungry and standing in shoes that had been on her feet for 12 hours. She felt something shift in her chest. Not rage, to something quieter and more absolute than rage. A decision. She turned and walked to the phone on the wall. She picked it up. She dialed cardiothoracic surgery. Dr. Imani Webb was the senior cardiothoracic surgical resident on call that night. She had been asleep in the on-call room for approximately 40 minutes when the phone rang, which meant she answered it in that particular state of half-consciousness that residents learn to navigate like a second language. "This is Webb." "Dr. Webb, this is Naomi Carter, cardiac ICU. I have a 58-year-old male, came in 30 minutes ago, presenting as cardiac event, but I believe we may be looking at a type A aortic dissection. I need eyes on him and I need a CT angiogram ordered." There was a pause on the line. "Has the attending signed off on this consult?" "No." Another pause. "Carter, Luce, you know I can't—" "I know," Naomi said, her voice steady. "I also know that if I'm right and we wait for the proper paperwork trail, Raymond Cole is going to die on that bed while we respect the chain of command. So I'm asking you, doctor to nurse, human being to human being, will you come look at him?" The silence lasted 4 seconds. Naomi counted. "Give me 5 minutes," Webb said. Dr. Webb was in the ICU in 3. What happened in the next 40 minutes is the kind of thing that doesn't translate fully into storytelling. It lives in the bodies of the people who were there, in the controlled intensity of a medical team suddenly moving with purpose. Webb took one look at Raymond Cole, reviewed the numbers Naomi had been tracking, asked 2 precise questions, and walked directly to the imaging console. And the CT angiogram showed a type A aortic dissection. Severe. The kind that, if they had waited until morning rounds, if they had let the night proceed on its assumed diagnosis, would have killed Raymond Cole before breakfast. He was in surgery within the hour, and Naomi Carter was escorted to the nursing director's office before his first incision was complete. The nursing director at Mercy General was a woman named Patricia Wren, 53, precise, fair-minded in the way that still managed to feel cold. The kind of institutional figure who had survived decades of hospital politics by never letting personal feeling contaminate professional decision. She was not unkind, she was not cruel, she was simply, implacably, the system. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Dr. Hess was already in the room. He did not look at Naomi directly. "You understand what you did tonight," Patricia said. It was not a question. "Yes. You went over your attending physician's explicit refusal to consult. You contacted a specialist without authorization. You are on active performance review." Patricia paused. "Naomi, I have tried to protect your position here. I want you to know that, but I cannot—" "He's in surgery right now," Naomi said quietly. "Room 4, type A dissection. If Webb hadn't come when she did—" "That is not the point." Patricia's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "The point is the process. The point is that a hospital cannot function if nurses are making physician-level decisions unilaterally. You know this." "I know a man would be dead." The room held that sentence like a held breath. Dr. Hess shifted in his chair, and he still didn't look at her. Patricia Wren folded her hands. "I'm placing you on administrative suspension pending a full review. 2 weeks, after which time the committee will determine whether I still have a job," Naomi finished. "Yes." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She felt, and this surprised her, almost calm. The calm of someone who had made the only decision available to them and accepted whatever came next as the price of that decision. She picked up her badge, set it gently on Patricia's desk, and walked out. The drive home was quiet. Atlanta at midnight, the highway half empty, the city lights blurring at the edges. She called Kezia from a red light. "I might have just destroyed my career," she said when her friend picked up. Kezia, and who had known Naomi for 15 years and understood the specific weight of that sentence, said, "Are you okay?" "No," Naomi said, "but I think I will be." She wasn't sure if she believed it, but she said it, and sometimes that's the first step to making something true. Suspension, Naomi discovered, had a texture she hadn't anticipated. She'd expected to feel free, unshackled from the hospital's fluorescent lights and political machinery, finally able to sleep past 6, to cook actual meals, to exist in her terracotta apartment without the weight of those 12-hour shifts pressing down on her spine. Instead, she felt untethered, purposeless in a way that frightened her. She cleaned the apartment twice. She replanted 2 of her more struggling succulents, and she finally called her aunt in Savannah, who she'd been meaning to call for 3 months. And they talked for an hour and a half about nothing and everything. And when she hung up, she sat on her kitchen floor and cried. Not about the suspension, not about Raymond Cole, not about any one thing, but about all of it at once. The accumulation of 9 years of giving without replenishment, of pouring from a vessel that nobody ever bothered to refill. Mama Bea's voice again. "You didn't come into this world to be comfortable, baby. You came to be useful." But what happens, Naomi thought, sitting on her kitchen floor with her knees to her chest and tears drying on her face, when being useful uses you all the way up? On the 5th day of her suspension, she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Is this Naomi Carter?" The voice was a man's, deep, a little rough at the edges, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd been somewhere hard and come back from it. "It is. Who's this?" "My name is Raymond Cole." Family, if this story has grabbed you and you haven't subscribed yet to Souls and Heart Stories, now is the moment. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss what Raymond said to Naomi and what happened next, because this is where the story changes. If you're one of our returning family members, welcome back. We see you. Now let's continue. Silence on the line. Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. She stopped. How are you calling me? How did you get this number? Dr. Webb, he said. I asked her who called it in. She told me your name. I had to go through 3 nurses at the hospital to get your number, and 2 of them told me you weren't there anymore. The 3rd one gave me this number and said you deserved a phone call. Naomi leaned against her kitchen counter. She could hear, underneath Raymond's steadiness, something fragile. The particular quality of a person who had recently been very close to the end of themselves and was still recalibrating. You should still be in recovery, she said automatically. The nurse in her never fully clocked out, a sound that might have been a laugh. Yeah, they tell me I should be doing a lot of things, mostly resting. I'm not very good at it. Me neither. A beat, then. They told me what you did. Dr. Webb explained it. His voice shifted slightly. You lost your job. I'm on suspension. Because of me. Because of a decision I made. That's different. She heard him breathe. In, out, the careful breath of someone with a healing chest. I have a daughter, he said. Her name is Maya. She's 26, just finished grad school. She was supposed to come visit me next month. Naomi didn't speak. She let him have the space. If you'd done the paperwork the right way, the careful way, Raymond said, I would not have been there when she came. The sentence landed in Naomi's chest and stayed. Mr. Cole. Raymond. Raymond, you don't owe me anything. I did what I did because it was right, that's all. I know, he said, but I want to do something about it anyway. Not because I owe you, because I want to. There's a difference. She almost said no, and she almost said I'm fine and please don't worry and all the other phrases she used like armor. But she was sitting in her apartment on her 5th day of suspension, and she was tired of armor. What did you have in mind? She said. She met him in person 8 days after that phone call, in a coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta called the Silver Maple. All exposed brick and jazz at a gentle volume, and the smell of dark roast that Naomi always found specifically comforting. He was already there when she arrived, sitting in a corner booth. A big man, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped grey at his temples, and the deliberate, careful movements of someone whose body was still reminding him to be grateful for it. He had honest eyes. That was the first thing she noticed, sitting across from him. The particular quality of eyes that had looked at serious things and decided not to look away. They shook hands. He still moved with that careful conservation of energy. You look better than the last time I saw you, Naomi said. Last time you saw me I was technically dying, Raymond replied. Low bar. She laughed, genuinely, the kind of laugh that surprised her. It had been a while since one of those. They talked for 2 hours. This is what she learned about Raymond Cole in that time. He was 58 years old, originally from Birmingham, Alabama, and had lived in Atlanta for the past 20 years. He was a retired civil rights attorney who had spent 30 years doing legal work for communities that couldn't afford legal work. Housing discrimination cases, voting rights, wrongful termination. Or he had a daughter, Maya, and a younger brother in Memphis. He had been a widower for 4 years. His wife, Cecile, had died of a brain aneurysm. Sudden, no warning, here and then, not here. He still wore his wedding ring. He didn't apologize for that. He'd retired from law 18 months ago and had been, in his own words, making a mess of figuring out what to do with my life without the work to define me. He'd been at the restaurant the night of the cardiac event alone, having dinner with a book, which he described with a self-deprecating tilt of his head as the most retired man thing he'd ever done. What were you reading? Naomi asked, because she was genuinely curious, and also because it was the kind of question that tells you everything. "Toni Morrison," he said. "Beloved, for the 4th time." She looked at him. Most people can barely get through it once." "Most people don't read it slow enough," he said simply. "You have to let it sit with you. Otherwise you're just consuming it. You're not actually reading it." Something settled in Naomi's chest, the particular sensation of recognizing a mind. She told him, in return, about herself. The 9 years, the write-ups, Mama Bay, the terracotta apartment, the plants. She told him about the performance review and the way it had felt to walk out of Patricia Wren's office. And she told him, with a directness that surprised even her, how frightened she was underneath the calm. Frightened that she'd get the call at the end of the 2 weeks that she was done. That 9 years of her life would be ended by a committee she hadn't chosen in a room she wouldn't be in. Raymond listened the way he'd probably listened as a lawyer, completely without interruption, his eyes steady and present. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you want to happen? Not what you think will happen. What do you want?" She opened her mouth to answer automatically. "I want my job back." But that wasn't actually what she said. What she said was, "I want to do this work without being punished for caring about it." He nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he already knew. "Then that's what we're going to figure out," he said. "Here is what Raymond Cole did in the week following that coffee shop meeting. And here is what it cost him to do it, and here is why he did it." He wrote a letter, not to Patricia Wren, not to the hospital's nursing committee. He wrote it to the hospital board of directors, or to the chief medical officer, and, in a move that still makes Naomi's breath catch when she thinks about it, to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where he had a professional relationship with a senior editor from a case he'd worked on 3 years prior. The letter was 4 pages. It outlined, in the precise and specific language of a man who had spent 30 years constructing legal arguments, the events of November 14th at Mercy General Hospital. It documented Naomi's clinical observations, her escalation to Dr. Hess, Hess's refusal, her decision to contact Dr. Webb, and the outcome. A correct diagnosis, a successful surgery, a man alive who would not have been. It also documented something Naomi didn't know, that Raymond had made quiet inquiries in the week between the surgery and the letter, and had found, then through conversations with former patients and staff who were willing to speak privately, that Naomi's 3 prior write-ups all shared a similar architecture. A black nurse, catching something, raising it, being told to step back, being right, and being punished for being right. "This is not a pattern of insubordination," the letter read. "This is a pattern of a hospital institution consistently penalizing a black woman for practicing medicine at a level that threatened the comfort of the physicians around her. The question this hospital's leadership must answer is not whether Naomi Carter broke the rules. The question is whose comfort those rules were designed to protect." The letter ran in the Journal-Constitution 4 days before Naomi's review committee was scheduled to meet. She didn't know about the letter until 2 days before the meeting, when Kezia called her in a state of barely contained explosion. "Naomi, have you seen the paper?" "I don't." "What?" "Naomi." She found it online, the letter, reprinted almost in full, under the headline, "Former civil rights attorney calls out Atlanta hospital after near-fatal misdiagnosis." She sat with her phone in her hands for a long time. Then she called Raymond. "You should have told me," she said, when he picked up. "Yes," he agreed, without apology. "I should have. I didn't because I knew you'd ask me not to do it." "You're right, I would have." "Which is why—" "Raymond," she stopped, breathed. "Thank you." Silence on the line. When he spoke again, his voice had a different texture, something careful and honest. "You saved my life. Oh, I couldn't let them take yours." The review committee met on a Thursday morning. Naomi sat on one side of a long table with 12 people on the other side and a lawyer, Raymond's recommendation, a woman named Diane Osei, who moved through the room like someone who had already won and was simply allowing the proceedings to confirm it. Beside her. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. At the end of it, the committee voted to reinstate Naomi Carter with full pay for the suspension period, to expunge the previous write-ups from her record, and to formally acknowledge what the language carefully called a systemic gap in the escalation protocols for nursing staff, which was hospital committee language for we did something wrong and we are deeply reluctant to say so directly. Dr. Hess was not disciplined. That part wasn't fair, and Naomi knew it, and she sat with the unfairness of it without letting it swallow the rest. Patricia Wren shook her hand at the end of the meeting and said, in a tone that held something complicated and genuine, "You're an exceptional nurse, Carter. I hope we don't make it so difficult for you to be one." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. She went back to work on a Monday in December, and it was different in the ways she'd expected and in ways she hadn't. Her co-workers met her return with a range of reactions. The warm ones came forward immediately, hugs and fist bumps, and one young nursing student named Priya, who had apparently put the Journal-Constitution article on the nurses' station bulletin board and refused to take it down even when asked. The cooler ones were professional and distant, and the way institutions are when they've been embarrassed. Dr. Hess said nothing to her directly for 3 days. On the 4th day, he stopped at the nurses' station where she was charting and said, without preamble, "You were right, about coal." She looked up. "And I should have listened," he finished. The words looked like they'd cost him something. That's all. He walked away before she could respond, which was probably for the best, because she didn't know what she would have said. Work was different in a quieter, more internal way too. Something had shifted in her. Some long-held tension she hadn't fully been aware of was partially, not completely, but partially released. She moved through the unit with the same care, the same intensity, the same Naomi-ness that had always defined her. But she was slightly less braced, and slightly more present in her own body. She'd started calling her aunt more regularly. She'd bought herself a proper coffee maker instead of the gas station coffee she'd been relying on for years. Small things, but they added up. And she and Raymond had coffee every 2 weeks, then every week, then sometimes dinner at the Silver Maple, or a Creole place in Inman Park that they both loved, or sometimes just on his back porch with takeout containers and the Atlanta skyline visible at a distance, talking until the night got cool enough that she needed the blanket he kept on the porch chair. She didn't rush it, neither did he. They were two people who had both learned the hard way what it cost to move without thinking, and so they were deliberate, careful. They let things grow at their own pace, and which turned out to be the only pace that actually worked. He told her about Cecile, really told her, the full version, not just the facts, but the texture of loving someone for 28 years, and then suddenly navigating a world-shaped absence where that person used to be. She listened the way he'd taught her, without trying to fix it, just holding space. She told him about Mama B, about the terracotta walls and why she'd chosen that color, about the feeling she got sometimes in the ICU when she'd saved someone, when the monitor steadied and the numbers normalized and the person in the bed was still in the world. That particular, private, wordless feeling of rightness. "That's what it is," Raymond said one evening on the porch. "What you're describing, that feeling, that's purpose, as that's the thing people spend whole lives looking for." "You found it in the law," she said. "Yes." He was quiet a moment. "And I miss it. I thought retirement was supposed to feel like relief. Sometimes it just feels like absence." She looked at him. Something was forming in her mind, an idea that had been moving at the edges of her thoughts for weeks. "What if," she said slowly, "you didn't retire from it? What if you just changed what it looked like?" He turned to look at her. "I'm serious. The hospital, what happened to me, it's not just me. You said it yourself in the letter. It's a pattern. There are nurses all over this city, all over this country, black nurses specifically, who are navigating exactly what I was navigating. And they don't have a Raymond Cole who writes a letter to the paper, as most of them just get quietly pushed out." She paused. "What if someone was fighting for them? Someone who knows the language?" The idea that took root on that porch took 18 months to fully grow. The Carter Cole Nursing Advocacy Foundation was incorporated in the spring, 17 months after Raymond Cole was wheeled into Mercy General's cardiac ICU on a Tuesday night in November. It operated as a legal and advocacy nonprofit specifically for nursing professionals facing institutional discrimination and professional retaliation. It offered free legal consultation, documentation support, and where necessary, representation. It partnered with 3 nursing schools in Atlanta for early education on professional rights. In its first year, it fielded 91 cases. It won 64 of them. Naomi remained a nurse, but that was important to her. Important in a way she wouldn't compromise. She wasn't ready to leave the unit. Maybe she never would be. But she built the foundation around her shifts, on her days off, in the hours she used to spend, exhausted and alone in her apartment, wondering if the work was worth the cost. Now she knew it was, and she knew, for the first time in a long time, that she wasn't paying the cost alone. The photograph on her nightstand changed, too. It used to be just Naomi and Mama B. Now there was a second photograph beside it, taken on the day the foundation officially opened its doors. Naomi, standing in front of the small office they'd rented in Decatur, in a burgundy blazer she'd bought specifically for the occasion, smiling with her whole face. And Raymond beside her, big and steady and warm, his hand just barely touching the small of her back. She looked at that photograph sometimes, early mornings before her shift, or late nights coming home, and thought about a Tuesday in November and a man she hadn't known and a decision she'd made in an instant. She thought about Mama B. You didn't come into this world to be comfortable, baby. You came to be useful. She thought, yes, but you were wrong about one thing, Mama. I came to be useful, and I came to be loved, and it turns out, if you're brave enough, you can have both. Raymond proposed on a Saturday morning in April, in the kitchen of his house, while she was making coffee and he was reading Toni Morrison, a different book this time, Song of Solomon, and he said it completely without ceremony, looking up from his page, yet like he'd simply arrived at a conclusion after careful consideration. I think you should marry me, he said. She turned from the coffee maker and looked at him, at this man who had been technically dying when she first saw him, who had written a letter that saved her career, who kept a blanket on his porch chair specifically because she got cold, who listened the way she'd always wanted to be listened to. I think so too, she said. Maya, who'd been updated on all developments with the slightly theatrical exasperation of a 26-year-old watching her parent fall in love, texted when she found out, "It's honestly kind of beautiful and also extremely embarrassing, and I'm here for it." Kezia cried. Naomi pretended not to. At the wedding, small and intentional in a garden in Savannah, Naomi wore ivory and her grandmother's earrings, and she stood in the evening light with the Spanish moss swaying overhead and the scent of gardenias in the warm air. And she let herself feel every single thing she was feeling. All of it, the joy and the grief and the gratitude and the astonishment of finding yourself at a destination you didn't know you'd been traveling toward. The officiant asked if she took Raymond Cole to be her partner. I do, Naomi Carter said, And she meant it with everything she had. Family, if this story reached inside you and touched something real, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me, what moment in this story hit you hardest? Was it the night Naomi picked up that phone and made the call she wasn't supposed to make? Or was it the morning Raymond proposed over coffee and a book? And tell me in the comments. Your answer might surprise you. And second question for you. If you were in Naomi's position, on a performance review, watching a patient deteriorate, knowing what you know, would you have made the same call she did? Be honest with me. The comments are a safe place. If this is your first time here at Souls and Heart Stories, you just found your home. We tell stories here that don't let you go. Stories about love, courage, loss, and the kind of ordinary people who do extraordinary things when it matters most. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. We drop new stories every week, and I promise you, every single one is worth your time. To our returning family, thank you. Thank you for being here, for sharing these stories, and for leaving your hearts in the comments. You are why this exists. This has been Souls and Heart Stories. Until next time, take care of each other. That's all any of us can do.